All right, guys, let's get into this story. This is a really crazy story, and I can't even believe the outcome. Good morning, you guys. Welcome back to another video. Today we are going to be getting into the Susan Smith case, and wow, what a case this is. Susan Smith did the complete unthinkable with her two young children. Susan Smith in 1994 strapped her children in their car seats and rolled her car into a lake in South Carolina. She proceeded to go along with this story that she had been carjacked and that the kids were kidnapped, and even had a sketch artist draw up the black male that carjacked her and took the kids, and then later on down the road admitted to her guilt that she did this. She actually recently was just up for parole last month and it was denied. But let's go ahead. I want to play a few clips to kind of like get the overall feel from the beginning of the case, and then I'm going to try to find a good video that can kind of like summarize everything, and we will go from there. So let's get into it. This is the Susan Smith story.
This is the wedding album of Susan and David that she had put in the trunk of the car to sync with the rest of the life that she was trying to leave behind.
I think Susan's wedding album, her wedding dress, the kids, basically everything to do with her marriage was in that car. We test the car, and the reason I test the car, I wanted to know as much scientifically as I could know. How long did it float? What would the boys have been facing? The car finally turns down like this, and you're seeing from the boys' point of view, and water comes up through the vents in the floorboard and ultimately covers, you know, the camera would have been the boy's face. And I mean, it literally made it hard for you to breathe.
You'll see a detailed walkthrough of evidence from the case and why David Smith, the boy's father, argues 30 years isn't enough punishment.
On October 25th of 1994, 23-year-old Susan Smith reported to police that her car had been hijacked by a black man with her sons, Michael and Alexander, still inside. Community members and law enforcement frantically searched for the two little boys as Susan and her husband made TV appearances begging for the children's safe return. Then, 9 days later, Susan Smith confessed that she had rolled her car into a lake with Michael and Alexander still inside. Susan was charged with 2 counts of murder. At trial, a jury found her guilty, but spared her the death penalty. And since 1995, that is where she has remained. But now, after almost 30 years, Susan Smith is up for parole. Alexander and Michael Smith were missing for 9 days before Susan Smith's confession. And for 9 days, Susan kept up a facade in front of her husband, law enforcement, and the public, begging through tears for her children to be found safely, like in this interview that she did with WYFF back in 1994.
I want to say to my babies that your mama loves you so much.
Susan Smith has already been tried and convicted of her children's murders. So her investigation is not a question or if she did it. Tonight, we are asking why. Why did Susan Smith kill her children? Joining me to discuss a former prosecutor who prosecuted Susan Smith, Tommy Pope, and investigative reporter with Fox Carolina. She created a documentary on David Smith, the husband's fight for justice, called 30 to Life, A Father's Fight for Justice. Grace Runkle. Grace, Tommy, thank you so much for being with us. Tommy, let me start with you because I love having you on as one of my legal experts, but this is the first time we have got to talk about this case that you prosecuted. And let me just start with, how do you feel? What do you think when you hear that she's going to have a hearing to determine whether or not she'll be released on parole?
You know, Judge, unfortunately, I sought the death penalty. I felt it was the appropriate penalty based on her crime, based on her conduct. I wanted her to face the same punishment the black man, if there'd been a carjacker, would have faced. I wanted the same punishment if David Smith, the husband, had done it. Unfortunately, the jury chose to give life, and I respect that. But what ultimately happened, they weren't aware that 30 years later, you and I would be sitting here talking about her being eligible for parole. And so the jury thought she was going to jail for life. She was going to focus on Michael and Alex and be remorseful for what she did. And we've seen by her conduct in prison, that's not the case.
I remember this case. I watched every piece of it unfold. I remember I was part of the public watching and thinking, what kind of person kidnaps two kids in a car or takes a car with two kids and dumps them into a lake? And then when her confession came out, I was absolutely blown away that a mother would do this. Grace, we know the father, David Smith, and calling for justice, seeking justice. What can you tell us about where he is with this, or what he's done throughout the years as she's been sitting in jail convicted of the murder of his two children?
Well, you know, for David, going back 30 years, it really has always been about keeping Michael and Alex, his sons, at the forefront. He says, a lot of people like to think of him as a victim, but he says the true victims are Michael and Alex. And so he's really kind of spent the last 30 years reminding people about that. And when we first started to make contact with him, to do this documentary, 30 to Life, he was saying how painful it is this year, especially, to go back and relive all of those memories from when the boys were missing, when he found out that they were murdered. But he said he needs to speak up for them now more than ever, because he says that if Susan were to get out, there would be no justice for Michael and Alex. So it's something he says he's been dreading this year for 30 years. A lot of the public wasn't aware that she was going to be up for parole, but of course, David Smith very much aware, and it's been very much on his mind now for 3 decades.
Well, I want to talk with both of you about the why. So let me again start with you though, Grace, and say why? Why does David think she did this? Who does this? Who has their two children strapped in the back of a car and then rolls them into a lake for a really horrific death? What does he say about why she did this to their children?
I don't think David really knows why. I think that's the question that everyone still has about this case, why people keep going back to it. He did tell us that looking back, she had always been manipulative, going back from when they first met. And he thinks, a lot of the 9-day search, a lot of what she did, obviously manipulating him and the public and law enforcement. I know that she was attempting to get a boyfriend back at the time who wrote infamously in a letter that he did not want kids. That, of course, I know Tommy can speak more to that, but the state argued very much weighing on her as to why she made this decision. But he also said that when he first spoke with Susan after she was arrested in Colombia when she was behind bars, he said that she apologized and that he still to this day does not think that she meant that apology. So as to why, I think he's still looking for that answer too.
All right, so Tommy, you and I have talked pretty frequently about the fact that motive is not an element of a crime. You don't have to know why. But we also know a jury wants to know why. Tell us about your prosecution in this case against Susan Smith and the why behind the murder of these two children.
Sure. The difficulty we face from the beginning is that anytime, I mean, you've said it several times now, a mother killing children, something's got to be wrong. So Susan reminds us of our sister, of our co-worker. So people are uncomfortable. In a strange way, they're more comfortable if it had been the carjacker, because it's not as unsettling to us in our everyday lives. But at the end of the day, Susan is selfish, and Susan decided that how erratic this decision was, that somehow she would have the opportunity to get this boyfriend back, as Grace said, who had written her this Dear Jane letter, if she didn't have kids. So her kids are in the car, her wedding album's in the car, her wedding dress is in the car. I always say everything but David was in the car. Now, the defense says it was a botched suicide, but, we tested the vehicle down the steep ramp. If she had come to the house wet, if she had come to the house that she ran to injured from diving out of a car and just said, I was suicidal and I let my kids roll in, please go help them, because they floated for 6 minutes before they went under. She had that opportunity, but she chose to put herself first. The boyfriend's sweatshirt she had on that night, she told David during that 9 days that she expected him to come by. And at the end of the day, I think if you give up the kids, you're a bad mother. But if the carjacker takes your kids, then you're a victim, and there's more chance Prince Charming may come back in to rescue you. Yeah. And so I firmly believe that's the case, Judge.
And what made her confess after 9 days? Tell us a little bit more, Tommy, about that, and why she, after 9 days, and again, I remember following this case for those 9 days, praying that something would be learned, and then she confesses.
Sure, I thought during the thing, quite honestly, I didn't think the children would be killed. Obviously, the longer it takes, the more likely you are to recover them. I thought it was probably more of a domestic situation. A carjacker just doesn't take kids. A carjacker takes your car, takes your money, may take a female from a sexual assault standpoint. They're not taking kids. So even till the end, I thought there'd be some logical outcome. Maybe she had them hidden or something of that nature, but her story, law enforcement runs a dual investigation. So they're looking for the black guy, they're looking for the car, they're looking for the kids, but they're also looking at David and Susan. They're doing polygraphs little by little. Her story wasn't meshing. A trigger point was the fact that the light she said she was in Monarch, which is right outside of Union, that there was nobody at the light that she was stopped at. That light would not be red but for a car being at the intersection. So they pursued that with her and said, could it have been somewhere else? And she flips and says, oh yeah, it was somewhere else. And so, it started unraveling. But I'll tell you, the media involvement, the media pressure, she went from enjoying the media and basking in the attention to not wanting to even do it. And the family's going, what do you mean you're not going to do it? We've got to find the kids. So when she, near the end, media like yourself started asking her some hard questions, and I think ultimately it broke her.
Wow, this case. All right, Grace, tell us about David and what he has said it was like for him to go through those 9 days, being questioned, being considered a suspect, because that's a normal investigation to look at those close to the children, and then hearing the confession, and now here we are awaiting a hearing to determine if she'll get parole.
Well, he said, again, he's been dreading this year for 30 years. It's really been weighing on him, and going back this year, having to relive it so many times has just, I can't even imagine how difficult that's been for him. But he also said that it is still great to hear how many people have been thinking about Michael and Alex after all of these years. And I think that's something that has been keeping him going. I know that he said the crime itself is unthinkable, but he says he can't even wrap his head around why the country really took up Michael and Alex as their own kids. I think that's really what gets him through these past 30 years, gets him through the upcoming parole hearing. But he also told us, he hasn't even begun to think about what life would be like if she got out. It's something that he says he should start to mentally prepare for, the possibility, but it's somewhere that he really doesn't even want to go to yet mentally.
Yeah, I can understand that. And when there are kids at the heart of a case, and the unthinkable happens, they disappear, I think all of America turns around the world, wants to know, because you think it could be you as well. So we are going to continue.
Very sorry. I am.
Susan Smith, who drowned her two young sons, Michael and Alex, in a lake more than 30 years ago, appears in front of the South Carolina Parole Board for the very first time, asking to be released, while the boy's father, David Smith, and prosecutors argued against parole.
This wasn't a tragic mistake. It wasn't something that she didn't mean to do. She purposely meant to end their life. I never have felt any remorse from her for it.
I have the emotional testimony and the board's decision to keep Susan Smith behind bars. Welcome to Crime Fix. I'm Anjanette Levy. For the first time, Susan Smith appeared in front of the parole board in South Carolina, and it didn't go as she had hoped. Smith was convicted of murdering her young sons, 3-year-old Michael and 14-month-old Alex, drowning them in John D. Long Lake in October 1994. Smith claimed a black man carjacked her in Union County, South Carolina, and took her car with Michael and Alex inside, but let her go. The story made national news for 9 days, and Smith kept up the lie until she couldn't any longer. Smith confessed to driving her car into the lake with Michael and Alex strapped into their car seats. A man she had been seeing at the time had broken it off with her and told her he wasn't interested in raising children. The prosecutor believed that that was the motive for the murder. Former solicitor Tommy Pope had sought the death penalty for Smith, but the jury, hearing evidence that she had been sexually abused by her stepfather and may have had a mental break, opted for a life sentence. That sentence made Smith eligible.
It's okay, Susan. Just talk with us.
I know that what I did was horrible. And I would give anything if I could go back and change it. And I love Michael and Alex with all my heart.
Ms. Smith, were you under the influence of drugs or alcohol the night that you murdered your children?
No, ma'am, I was not.
Smith's attorney told the parole board that she had mental health problems.
It is a mental health story. It's about the dangers of untreated mental health. It is about the lack of insight, the lack of diagnosis into mental health.
Your attorney talked about working with mental health. Is that helpful to you?
Ma'am,
Mr. Thomas,
I hear you.
Mr. Thomas talked about the fact that you were working with mental health, and my question is that helpful to you?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that something that you would be willing to continue with on the outside if you were granted parole?
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Smith, your crime took a lot of resources from the law enforcement community. What, if anything, would you say to the folks who worked so hard to find your children if you had the opportunity to speak to them today?
That I'm sorry that I put them through that. I really, really am. And I'm especially sorry to the drivers that I had to find them. I wish I could take that back. I really do. I didn't lie to get away with it. I'm scared. I didn't know how I could tell the people that loved them that they would never see them again. I didn't know how I could tell David he couldn't see his sons again. And I'm sorry. I don't know. I know that's not enough. I know it's not, but I don't know. I know those just sound like words, but they come from my heart. They really do.
Has been marked by a number of infractions. She was transferred to another prison after having sex with 2 prison guards. She's been in trouble for using marijuana and using another inmate's PIN number, and there have been suicide attempts. From 2015 until this year, Susan Smith didn't have any reprimands, but then in August, prison officials said they caught Smith talking with a journalist on her prison tablet, and that's a violation of the prison rules. A document says, the conversations clearly discuss conducting an interview and even filming a documentary and ways to get paid for it. They also discussed in depth the crime and the events leading up to and after it actually took place, including such details as to what was in the trunk of the car when it went into the water and her plans to jump from a bridge while holding the boys, but one woke up. The document said Smith promised to provide contact information for family and friends, including David Smith, and that the filmmaker was putting money on Susan Smith's canteen and phone call account. Smith lost her tablet privileges for 90 days, but she says she's appealing. The chair of the parole board asked Smith about her prison record.
I've never been in trouble before, and things that I have been found guilty of in here have been just stupidity. I know I made a lot of mistakes in here, and I have learned from them. And before this last infraction, it had been 10 years, because I grew up and I knew that I needed to stop making dumb decisions, and I did. I knew it was time to just, so I know to grow up and do the right things. I just made a lot of
What do you feel is
dumb
the
choices and mistakes in here.
incarcerated?
So I know I've learned from those mistakes. Ma'am,
What do you think is the most important
And I'm not
thing
gonna do
that
that.
you've learned while you've been incarcerated?
ma'am,
What do you think is the most important
That,
thing that you've learned while you have been incarcerated?
that people are important, that forgiveness and love, that family is important, and that decisions we make not just affect us, they affect the people that we love. And not to take things or people for granted.
All right. Is there anything else that you would like to tell us today that wasn't in your packet or that has not already been said?
I would just like to say that I am a Christian, and God is a big part of my life, and I know He has forgiven me, and it is by His grace and mercy that, and I have a lot of faith, and I live by that every day. And I just ask that you show that same kind of mercy as well. And I guess, yeah, that's it.
Thank you.
Smith's lawyer said she plans to live with her brother and has been working on an associate's degree. She's a Christian, and she's tutored other inmates and helped them get their GEDs. 2 longtime friends of Smith's also spoke on her behalf, supporting her release.
That's a bad situation, and was dealt with.
I really think Susan is ready for parole now. She has.
I met Jen after she was ghosted by an ex. It took her years to get over it, and he just popped back into her life. Looking for answers, she found my advice.
Has surrounded herself with a caring support community that advises and encourages her, and she listens to them.
But then it was time for the parole board to hear from the only people who were there to speak for 3-year-old Michael and 14-month-old Alex, their father, David, his wife, Tiffany, and other family members. Former solicitor Tommy Pope and current solicitor Kevin Brackett were also there.
It's been a tough 30 years. I'm not here to speak about what she's done in prison. You all have the records and accounts of all that. I'm just here to advocate on Michael and Alex's behalf and as their father. You know, God gives us free choice. And she made free choice that night to end her life. This wasn't a tragic mistake. It wasn't something that she didn't mean to do. She purposely meant to end her life. I never have felt any remorse from her for it. She's never expressed any to me. I never seen it on paper. No, you've heard, she changed my life for the rest of my life that night. Some for the better, some for the worse, but what she did, not only to Michael and Alex, she came pretty close to causing me to end my life because of the grief that she brought upon me. But thankfully she didn't. I understand back in 95 that through the state's law, life in prison meant 30 years to life. And now that's different, but at that time that's what counts. I understand that. But ultimately to me, that's only 15 years per child. Her own children. It's just not enough. So I'm asking that you please deny her parole today. And hopefully in the future, but specifically today. Not let her out. I miss them very much. And I love them very much. And I will be here every 2 years going forward to ensure that their death doesn't go in vain. Thank you.
David Smith's wife, Tiffany Smith, also spoke about the loss of Michael and Alex and watching her husband live through the last 30 years.
So as David's wife, I have stood by him for the last 30 years and watched his pain, his suffering, his dark days that you cannot imagine. It's been hard as a loving wife to stand back and watch him suffer the pain that he has gone through. To not want to get out of bed some days. I don't feel that it's time for her to be let out because she took 2 lives. She didn't just take 1. She took 2 precious little boys that we haven't been able to watch grow up. And as Becky stated earlier, all the things that we've missed out on because of them not being here, all the things they missed out on growing up in and doing. And for her to be in prison for the last 30 years, you would think that she would have thought about what she's done. She would have said, I'm sorry. But she hasn't said, I'm sorry. She hasn't even called him. Hasn't even told him she was sorry. Much less the world. For 9 days, all I can think about is how much she lied and manipulated everybody. The whole world. I watched it and believed her myself.
The parole board also heard from Savannah Smith, David and Tiffany Smith's daughter. She was born years after Michael and Alex were killed.
What I had stolen from me was 2 older brothers. The good and the bad of having older siblings. And I now try to use my life as a way to live for them. And growing up, I didn't quite understand it my whole life, but when I finally did, I think I had witnessed it like I was there. The pain that not only was caused to me in like a domino effect, but what I have seen firsthand with my father, my aunt, and our whole hometown. We can no longer say that we're from Union County without Susan's actions being brought up. And just for the sake of all of us and our whole community, I ask that you deny her request.
And then it was Tommy Pope's turn. He was the solicitor who prosecuted Smith and had sought the death penalty.
Susan's conduct from the day she rolled the kids in the lake, the defense claimed a botched suicide, but she was able to save herself. She was able to blame a black guy. She wasn't wet. She wasn't injured when she runs to the house and concocts this story. Susan has always focused on Susan. I will believe to the end of my time that Susan made a horrible, horrible choice to choose a man over her family. I said the boys were in the car, her wedding gown was in the car, her wedding album was in the car. She thought in a nice package she could roll that away. If she could have put David in the car, he would have been there too. In a nice package, she could roll that away and start this new life with this other man. And she led everyone on, including David, for 9 horrible days. And so, as you look at her conduct in prison, whether it was a relationship with guards, the social media, the attention, the conduct recently with the publisher, Susan, she's got people outside, I'm sure you've heard from them, that want to take care of her. Susan has always focused on what's best for Susan. And so the evidence that you have before you, I think, tells clearly that she has not focused on Michael and Alex. She only has and continues to focus on herself. And so on behalf of this family, on behalf of justice and the justice for this case, it's not about her behavior or what she would do when getting out, but I know one of your criteria is the nature of the crime and whether the punishment is there. And I would submit for the crime she committed, the actions she committed, that punishment has not been achieved yet. And so I would ask you to deny parole. Now, thank you for your time.
And the current solicitor, Kevin Brackett, also addressed the parole board.
I've reviewed the file. I've pulled some of the evidence out, which is in a closet just off my office. Evidence like the note that was written to Susan Smith by her boyfriend.
The parole board voted swiftly, with one member recusing herself because she had worked at a prison that housed Smith. The vote was unanimous to deny parole for Susan Smith.
As a reminder, Mrs. Mira did recuse herself. Ms. Susan Smith is denied parole. The vote is unanimous. Numbers 1 and 6. Thank you.
So today has been 30 years coming. Wasn't sure how to feel, what to expect. I know what I was hoping. I think, Susan, in the last 30 years, through her action, has continued to proven that it's all about her. What all this has done to her, how it has affected her. I haven't seen any remorse from her. So, for her to think that I would even speak on her behalf, I do not understand that.
In the end, David Smith wants people to remember the victims in this case, his 2 little boys, Michael and Alex, who would be in their 30s had they been allowed to live that October night in 1994.
All right, with that said, I'm going to close out this video here with these 2 beautiful little angels on the screen. And what a story. just to think every 2 years that family has to go to parole hearing for her. Hopefully it just continues to be denied and denied and denied and denied. But it is good to see that the father remarried and was able to have more children. That was my first thought, was it was able to have more children. Not that that would ever replace his 2 boys, but that's all for this one, guys. I'm going to try to pump out some more content for this week. I will see you in the next one. Thanks.
Thanks so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and share with some friends.